One of the strange historical ironies, and one that you deal with at length in the essays that make up your book, is the authoritarianism and basically fascism that's ingrained in American history. That Nazis, for example, looked to the United States for inspiration, didn't they, when it came to eugenics and immigration laws? That we don't have these, we don't have this innocence that some on the right might pretend we do when it comes to our own history here.
The American tradition of unfreedom is not European fascism as we've come to know it. It is a kind of Herrenvolk democracy where one demographic group, and traditionally that group is white people, are seen as being allowed to control who has rights and who does not, and excluding other people who are not considered white from the political process. And the danger is, of course, at certain moments in American history, Americans have tried very hard to extend those rights to people regardless of race, regardless of gender. And those efforts have often been beaten back. There have been backlashes, most notably after Reconstruction, which was a flawed but genuine attempt to create a multiracial democracy in America. Racist Democrats in the South imposed what was basically an authoritarian one-party system by excluding Black Americans from the ballot. In the 1920s, we had, Congress passed a series of immigration laws that were designed to, in the words of the authors, this is not something I'm attributing to them, in the words of the authors, to maintain the demographic dominance of what they considered to be white Americans, a definition that excluded people like Jews and Italians at the time, which, was an inspiration to fascism in Europe. It wasn't the same thing. It's not the same ideological tradition. Not the same ideological tradition, but it was an influence. And so we have to guard against that tradition of unfreedom here, precisely because, our own popular understanding of our own history has not really acknowledged that tradition.
Hasn't acknowledged it, tends to deny it. And as you say, guarding against it, we haven't been so successful recently. What's interesting about your book is it could have just been another book about the Trump presidency. We have a lot of good books about the Trump presidency, but unfortunately, it's about the America we're in today. Donald Trump has been gone more than 6 months. And yet, look at what has happened to the right in the intervening period. Look at what happened with the insurrection. Look at what's happened since the insurrection. In his news conference today, in which he announced ridiculously his plans to sue social media companies, Trump was asked about the insurrection, which led him to say this. Have a listen.
There were no guns in the Capitol. They burned it except for the gun that shot Ashley Babbitt. And nobody knows who that man were. If that were the opposite way, that man would be all over. He would be the most well-known, and I believe I can say man, because I believe I know exactly who it is, but he would be the most well-known person in this country, in the world. But the person that shot Ashley Babbitt, boom, right through the head, just boom. There was no reason for that.
First off, he's wrong, of course. There have been multiple firearms charges among those arrested at the Capitol. Last night on the show, we talked about Lonnie Kaufman, who has militia ties, drove to the Capitol with a truck full of guns and explosives. But also, you have the leader of the GOP, the de facto leader, possibly the next president, certainly he's the last president of the United States, basically endorsing, embracing, valorizing insurrectionists. Ashley Babbitt has become a martyr on the right, on the far right in particular, and you have the president basically defending her while attacking a police officer, law enforcement, the government. That is where we have reached now as a nation.
Yeah, you can see how far Blue Lives Matter goes when the police are opposing a violent attempt to overthrow an election. And what you need to understand about that is that stems from an ideology that says that the Republican Party represents the only true Americans in the United States, and therefore only they can legitimately hold power. And therefore it is legitimate for them to violently attempt to overthrow an election precisely because the Democrats represent an America that does not truly count as American. And that's a very dangerous ideology. It's one that has, plagued America throughout, since the founding. This idea that there's one group of people who are the only legitimate bearers of, inheritors of America's freedom and democracy. This is just an extremely dangerous place to be, precisely because what Donald Trump says then becomes the position of the entire party. I'm just not sure where we go from here.
Well, that's interesting you say where we go from it. In your book, you describe going back to read classic texts on authoritarianism after Donald Trump declared his candidacy for president. And after that, you write, the realization dawned that Trump, win or lose, was summoning to the fore the most treacherous forces in American history and conducting them with the ease of a grand maestro. He won. He became president. Okay, he lost, but he may run again. Using your line, win or lose, how does this end? How does the movement he created, energized, emboldened, how does it get defeated?
Our system, because, through the Electoral College, through malapportionment in the Senate, through gerrymandering in the House, incentivizes this kind of politics because it allows one party to hold power without winning a majority of the votes because they have an ideal geographic distribution of voters. And because of that, it becomes even more important for the Republican Party to persuade its base that they are on the verge of destruction or annihilation, and therefore anything they do to retain power or to be cruel towards the people outside, they've defined as outside their community, is justified. And that's how you end up with, these voting laws in the states that are attempts to disenfranchise Democratic constituencies. And it's how you end up with justifying, a violent insurrection that was designed to overturn the 2020 presidential election. It's just a very dangerous place to be, and I'm not sure how you change it without altering the structure of American politics so that it is more fair than it currently is. Now, the Democrats have within their ability to do that, but it's not clear that they're capable of doing so because they would have to eliminate the filibuster, they would have to admit new states, they would have to protect voting rights on the federal level, and they have thus far not shown a willingness to go to that, to really do that as a party.
Yes. And we're going to be talking a lot more about the filibuster and some of that democracy-building efforts later in the show. Before I let you go, Adam, very briefly, we're almost out of time, but Donald Trump, as I mentioned, he held that press conference today. It wasn't just to embrace the insurrectionists. He says he's suing Facebook, Twitter, Google for removing his accounts, for silencing conservatives. You're well known on Twitter for your line about this left-wing political correctness is out of control. It's a line of sarcasm you often use. What do you make of this aspect of Trumpism, the insecurity?
I mean, look, if you want to say that tech companies have too much power, that's one thing. But it's another thing entirely to say that they violate your First Amendment rights when they don't want to host your statements. In fact, they also have First Amendment rights, and they don't have to give you a free account on their website if they don't feel like it or if you violate the terms of service, as Donald Trump did. And in fact, it's very important that people who are powerful, like Donald Trump, don't get to tell people what to do with their own property.
Hi, I'm Mehdi Hasan. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more of the Mehdi Hasan Show by clicking on any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thank you for watching.